Scholars have come up with any number of ways to interpret Scripture, from understanding what the genre of literature is to archaeology for historical insights, from trying to discern the concerns and motives of a writer to tracking language and its usage over time and its nuances. But one method for understanding the Bible is as old as the Bible itself, and that is storytelling. The ancients held this method in such high regard that it is the reason that our texts preserve so many different versions of the same story. Each time a story is told, the ancients held, a bit of truth is shed from it. Now, as a professional interpreter of biblical texts, I mean, that's what a preacher is, I find this method especially helpful. And oftentimes I let a character live in my imagination for a while and let that character tell me something extraordinary in the life of faith. I let the Bible verses story themselves back into my imagination. I like to preach in conventional ways, to be sure, but sometimes storytelling is the best. So Hagar's story is very interesting historically because it attempts to explain how it is that descendants of a common ancestor, Abraham, ended up being two different people. The descendants of the son Ishmael would become nomads, the Bedouin people, who would inhabit the Fertile Crescent. The descendants of Yitzhak, on the other hand, would be the more settled people, called in time the people Israel. And all this hinges on this story of Hagar getting sent away with her son. It's a troubling text, to be sure, but today we listen to the story about one of the founding mothers of faith, and let Hagar speak for herself. I had known Sarah intimately for many years when these events took place, known her as only a maidservant can. I had seen her tired, heard her prayers, witnessed her generosity, her impatience, and known how deeply pained she was to be without child. It was a long and slow change in her. At first, she trusted God's promises, but then she became bitter and angry. And finally, she resigned herself to being childless, and that was the saddest part. So she offered me to her husband, Abram, that I might bear a son that would be raised as her own. Now, I know it seems strange to you, but that was our custom. She asked my consent, though she did not need to. In a flat voice, she said, "I need to give Abram a son. Do you want the job?" I agreed immediately because there were advantages for a servant who became the mother to an heir. I'd be relieved of many of my duties and treated with a certain respect I had not had up to this point, and my place in the household would be secure. And so I said yes, and then started to feel a sense of dread I could not shake. I went into Abram for several months and in time conceived. Abram was delighted, but he took pains to mute his joy. Sarah remained distant and gray, but she did all the proper things, giving me a tent of my own and helping me to prepare for the child. And then he was born. Oh, this beautiful child of mine. Sarah named him Ishmael. God hears. The name seemed fitting, though perhaps a bit of a bitter irony. Sarah had prayed time and time again for a child of her own, and no answer had come. Did God hear? Sarah was kind to the boy, but never warm. Toward me, she grew increasingly hostile. I admit, I changed as well. For the first time in my life, someone loved me simply because I was me, even though he was always told that she was his mother. He was clearly attached to me, my little Ishmael, delighted in my face, reached for me, smiled at me, sought my comfort. Abram adored his son and visited him several times a day. Since I served as the boy's nurse, I saw Abram also quite frequently. This seemed to only deepen Sarah's resentment towards me, and I learned to avoid her. 4 years passed, and then, against all expectation, Sarah became pregnant. It was like watching the old Sarah return. Joy spread through the whole household, and I was genuinely so happy for her. She was radiant in her pregnancy, and she laughed again. Once I heard her say, "God has made laughter for me, and all who hear me will laugh with me." And her son was born, and they named him Yitzhak. He laughs. He was a beautiful boy, and it was a beautiful name, and Sarah loved him fiercely. Then some time later, as the boys were growing, I was playing with Ishmael in the courtyard, and he was laughing as children do, wildly and with abandon. And Sarah heard him, and then her face twisted into anguish, and she went running away, saying, "Yitzhak, Yitzhak." And I thought something terrible must have happened, and that she was calling for her son, Yitzhak, who had perhaps fallen or been kicked by a sheep or something. I did not know that she was actually enraged at my son Ishmael, and she was simply saying, "He laughs, he laughs." I did not understand that. I ran after her and heard her as she cried out to Abraham, "Drive out this slave woman Hagar and her son, for the son of a slave woman shall not share inheritance with my son Yitzhak." Abraham stood stunned. But I saw the decision taking shape in his eyes. I ran to my tent with Ishmael, and soon Abram entered. I held the boy so tightly, I kissed his forehead and wept, and then Abram said only to me, "Be ready in the morning." I did not sleep that night. At dawn, he came carrying bread and a skin of water. He could not look at his son. He could not look at him. I knew his heart was breaking, but not as much as mine was. And so I took Ishmael's hand firmly, and we left. We walked and walked and walked and walked. In the parched wilderness of Beersheba we walked. I do not know where we went. I was filled with rage and grief and fear, and the little boy's legs could not keep up to me. I, in my angry blindness, tugged him along, deaf to his cries and his complaints, his growing weariness. What could I say? How could I explain that his father had sent him away because of me, because of Sarah, because of his brother, because I was a slave? It was hot that day and the next and the one after that. We stopped briefly now and then. Ishmael would fall into an immediate sleep whenever we stopped, and I would wake him again harshly, yanking him into steps before he was fully awake. Water was long gone. And now it was the fourth day. It was midday, and suddenly I realized we were going to die. Ishmael and I were going to die in that wilderness. I could not bear to see it. I could not bear to look at his little eager eyes, looking at me as if I could save him, as if love alone could make water appear in the wilderness. So I found a meager bush and I put him there. In one moment of overwhelming tenderness, I held him tight and pressed his dry face to my own because the tears were long gone. And then I walked away as far as a bow shot. And I prayed to whatever God was listening, what have I done? How has this come to be? I cannot bear to see his little pleading face. There is nothing I can do to help him. Please, God, please do not let me see the child die. Do not let me see him die. And then I heard a voice. I heard a voice. What's the matter, Hagar? The voice said. Do not be afraid. God has heard the voice of the child where he is. Arise and take hold of him, the voice said, for I will make of him a great nation. I looked around. I didn't see anyone. I had no idea where the voice was coming from, but still I ran to my son and I held him tight, and I heard him say, Mommy, I am thirsty. And as I held him there, I looked over his shoulder, and there it was, a well of water. And so I took the skin and filled it. And we drank our fill until the tears would run again. But this time they were tears of joy and gladness and rejoicing. We were going to live. My boy and I were going to live. God had heard him. God had saved him. God had saved me and forgiven me for my self-pity, in which I had wandered so unthinkingly, endangering this child of mine. And so it was that my son grew to be a man, grew up tall and strong. As you see, the wilderness became his home. He never left there, but settled, he and I together. And I thank God daily, for God heard the child where he was, even when I could not.